hello, welcome. This is Let's Talk About Myths, baby. And this is the third time that I have recorded this introduction because I keep being completely incapable of staying, sounding like a rational human being who people would want to listen to. I'm Liv, I'm the host, and normally I'm completely hinged, but right now everything in my life is bad and everything in the world is so much worse. So we're just all having a time, but thankfully, at the third time recording this, I'm going to keep that horror to a minimum. Today I am here with the first episode in Women's History Month episodes, which, I mean, with the state of things, what's the point? But they do give me a theme. They give me something to work off of. I talk about women in this podcast in every single episode. It's the entire point. But see, in Women's History Month, I can focus on certain women. I can have a theme, something to work towards. I've already got incredible episodes planned, dreamed up. This month is going to be fun, I hope. That's provided I can function as a human being. I've got high hopes. But today, thankfully, we have an incredible conversation that I recorded months ago when I was a functioning adult who didn't feel like she was going to cry at every moment. I spoke with the absolutely wonderful Ioanna Papadopoulou. She has written, I don't even know how to get into this because I'm just so excited. Ioanna has written a novel about Demeter, but like the Demeter that I didn't know I needed, an angry Demeter. I think the Demeter we all need right now, the feminine rage Demeter. And we had just the most fun talking about Demeter as a character, about Ioanna's novel, Winter Harvest. Demeter is fucking wonderful. And if you didn't already gather from her name, Ioanna is Greek. She's from Thessaloniki. And so we also just talked about Greece, Greek culture, writing Greek mythology as a Greek. It's important that we also have Greek voices in this realm. It's incredibly important. The more retellings, the better, but the more retellings by Greek people, even better. Because it's their culture. And while we've all been able to kind of like take it and use it like it's ours, it isn't. It's theirs. And so I'm utterly thrilled to have Ioanna on the show. And I really hope I'm not butchering your name, but my Greek is only coming along a tiny bit. We had so much fun. We're keeping in touch. We're just going to like chat and be pals now, which is truly a joy. Demeter is so interesting. This book is so fascinating. I fucking love an angry woman. And that is what we have here. And also just like a conversation about an angry Demeter, because Demeter, of all people, deserves to be angry. Conversations, the feminism of female rage, Demeter's Winter Harvest, with Ioanna Papadopoulou. I'm so excited to talk about Demeter. I'm so excited to talk about your book. I just kind of want to hear every single thing, but mostly I'm excited. You are now going to be the second person of like fully Greek descent who I've talked to on the show about their novels about Greek mythology, and I love that that's happening more and more. So, I mean, okay, clearly I just want to talk about everything. But why Demeter? What were you wanting to do with your book? Tell me whatever you want to know and we'll go from there.
All right, perfect. So the story starts when I was a little girl and I was first introduced to Greek mythology all the way back in the early 2000s in Thessaloniki, in northern Greece, where I got my first books about Greek mythology. I started like learning and really liking this part of my culture. And I loved the story of Demeter there because I thought she was so badass. I thought she was so cool because she was the only one that was really strong and really independent from all the goddesses of the Dodecatheon, and she was this person that had managed to force her will on Zeus and kind of won. And I always, in my head, in my personal canon of Greek mythology, she was like the cool goddess of the earth, the third really important. Like in my head, it wasn't Hades, it was her as like that third really powerful deity. And as I was growing up and learning English and seeing how Greek mythology was viewed in the Western world and in English-speaking books, it was always such a huge sad point in my stories that Demeter was mostly depicted as a grieving mother, that she lost that coolness and that strength and that idea of that independence that I loved as a little girl and I continue to love. So as I was reading more Greek mythology, and I started also having certain personal issues with the Greek mythology retellings that were being created, because I felt that they were missing certain things about Greece and about Greece as a place rather than the characters, I thought that I'm going to try to write my own. And I thought if there's going to be one ancient Greek mythology story that I will attempt to write, it can't be anything but Demeter.
I love that so much. Demeter is absolutely fascinating, and I do think that she is so often like set aside, like you're saying, as this grieving mother, or just as this like any old part of the Olympians. Like she doesn't stand like sort of above them in most of the, the ways that certainly, yeah, like you're saying, the English speaking world takes in Greek mythology. And I think, I mean, that's so in large part because like for the last few, maybe 1,000 or just 100, but all of it years, these stories have been retold to us by men who just see her as that because, we have the Homeric hymn to Demeter. That's her main surviving source. It's like the one thing that survives in great detail.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, that's all they go with. But I'm with you. Yeah, like she's utterly fascinating. She's an earth goddess. She is inherently, like without a doubt, one of the most powerful goddesses.
Yeah. And what I really found interesting, especially from my research, is how much people speculate when they study mythology as a science, because that exists. You can study mythology outside of the specific place. That they think that this is probably a reimagining and a remnant of an even older fertility deity, and that's why she has a lot of these archetypes that don't match with the rest of the gods. And the other thing that I found really interesting, and obviously it's kind of a different tradition, but I also thought it was really interesting as a connection, is that I don't know if you're aware of the Orphic tradition of mythology.
Yes? ? No, so I am. But it's become kind of like a running joke on the show that I try to avoid talking about it too much.
Okay,
because
so
it is
I shouldn't
so
talk.
confusing.
That's fine. I won't talk about it then.
No, you can feel free. No. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Demeter in the Orphic tradition for sure.
Because in the Orphic tradition, some of the references to her are that Rhea becomes Demeter when the world is remade, because Zeus swallows the world and remakes it. And I thought that again was a really interesting connection to the idea of Demeter as something far older than perhaps the rest of the world. So although I didn't do anything with the Orphic tradition, we don't need to refer to it ever again in this podcast. I thought it was a really interesting side note that even in that other so different tradition, this idea of oldness inside Demeter was there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not any kind of coincidence that there are all of these layers of like Mother Earth fertility
Mhm.
goddesses, right? Like there really aren't any other gods that have that same like sort of repetitive nature down the generations. You know, we have Gaia and then we have Rhea and then we have Demeter and like that's so indicative of this like greater, more ancient power. Like so many of the gods, like you know, they're based in these older concepts very often, particularly I think the goddesses, like from that time when, you know, we think that goddesses might have been more worshipped than the men, and then they get these remnants passed down, and then the remnants become, you know, what we know of as Demeter, but she would have started as something so much bigger.
Yes, and definitely the literature that has remained for us is also a problem for Demeter as well, because as you said, the vast majority of works that she might have starred in have not been recorded. If there were, like, I don't even know if there were. So I
Mm-hmm.
got, for my own research, I got most of my sources actually from scholarly kind of works, from geographers like Pausanias, from people like Pseudo Apollodorus. So there were like bits and bobs here and there that you collected and you got a little bit more of an idea, but none of them on their own are really enough of a material for you to kind of learn to love Demeter from the original material.
It makes me think of how Hestia is often handled too, like in this way where she's almost like too important for literature to have survived, or rather that like the way I see Hestia, and I feel like you know you might agree it's kind of similar to Demeter, is that like she was so important on a day-to-day level. Like the ancient Greek people were so invested in her in their like daily lives that it just kind of meant there was no need to put her into these, you know, dramatic stories of you know, hurting mortals or doing weird things. Like it's almost like she was above that because she was so important to an actual human living their life.
No, that's absolutely the case. I mean, even in modern Greek, the word estia is still part of our way
Mm.
of describing the home and of describing hospitality, even. So it
Yeah.
definitely
I love
feels that the more important you were, actually, that's a really interesting concept, and I've never considered that. The more you're part of everyday life, the less you are a fictional thing.
exactly. Yeah. I love it. I think it like it's both frustrating because we want to read more, but when you see it that way, it's really empowering and interesting and kind of beautiful, you know?
And also now makes me think, Hestia is actually quite an important character in my book. I am, I think, quite different in that
Ooh.
she does play a role, but I kind of have tried to give her a role in between the myths because I don't actually have myths to use for her.
Yeah.
So I kind of tried to make her have a role in between those myths. But I'm now thinking, can I go rewrite my book and use that idea more? Can we just delay the? Because that's so interesting now. I'm now thinking, do I need to write a Hestia novel now?
Please. Oh my god. Could you imagine? I would love that so much. Please write a Hestia novel.
Don't know what I would write, but at least a novelette,
I
at the
know.
very least.
It's one of those things. It's like I think that's what makes certain characters, Demeter and Hestia among them, like so interesting as characters for retellings because there is so little to work off of that it is both frustrating because you don't have as much to go on as and as much to be inspired by, but it also means that these characters are like completely open-ended. You can make them whatever you want them to be, whatever you like believe them to be.
Yes, I mean, I wrote Winter Harvest trying to be really close to the myths. Like, I tried to not allow myself too much space beyond them. I tried to focus on being creative in the space of connecting the myths rather than in the myths themselves. Um, because I felt that because Demeter doesn't really have any other representation, let's start by being as true as possible, and then hopefully that will inspire someone after me to write a more free interpretation of her myths. But I tried to piece together these myths, but on the few times, and actually there were only really two works of literature that I had. I tried for those two to be really close. So I have the Homeric hymn to Demeter, which is the more popular one, but there is also a hymn to Demeter by Callimachus.
Mm-hmm.
And I also was quite strict myself, although it's not as detailed as the Homeric hymn. So for these two parts of the story, I tried to be quite strict with myself to not really deviate too much. But then because so many of the other myths that I used, I only really had a small description of them from geographers or from scholars, I then was really free to do whatever I wanted. So I tried on the small parts that there actually was something that lasted through the centuries and I could use as a basic material to stay true to that.
I feel that same way whenever I'm talking about the myth, so I love that so much. Like I particularly on the show, like I don't deviate at all. Like if we don't know, then I'm just gonna say that, and I love that. Like I want to be talking about, you know, exactly how the ancient Greeks saw them, like as far as we can tell now. Like people often ask me like, oh, what do you think this character would think about that? And I like never have an answer because I don't like to think about it in that way. Like I want to think about it more of like culturally, like what they believed versus seeing these people as like kind of, you know, like these fictional characters that like I can interpret what they would have thought. Like no, I want to work off like just the ancient sources, even if they give us nothing, like Hestia's or whatever, you know, where we have like literally nothing about her.
I think that there is value in both. I just felt that for that book, it wasn't the place to deviate. In other kind of works I've done, I would possibly deviate because there would be more freedom, or there would be more materials, or there's more variation, so there's more to work with. But I'm already kind of afraid that if all you know of Demeter is the grieving mother, then when you read my Demeter, you're going to have a bit of a shock, and I want to be able to defend myself by being very true to the sources, because I did not write the book so much trying to think of the historical side. So I've not tried to mimic a specific period of ancient Greece. I've just more created a wider world of how I was taught ancient Greece, but mixed in with issues of contemporary Greece, but still like set in a pseudo historical element of the past. But what was really interesting in this book is that a lot of the issues that I discussed and a lot of the perspectives that I used to tell Demeter's story, I think could have transferred to early 20th century, even part of my family and other Greek family dynamics of the late 20th century, early 21st century of Greece, and especially the remnants of the older generation. And I would find that a lot of these stories can still hold and can be retold in a very contemporary Greek setting. So
I love that.
I kind of didn't try to say that this is me telling you a historical story. I'm telling you a mythological story. And within that, I've created an idea of the past and a world where it's quite timeless and it's quite shapeless, but it's so very Greek that the place is kind of the most important thing, not so much the time, if that makes sense. And I think that's why some people obviously have picked up the anachronisms, but I kind of think, but if you are a deity, how much time matters? And these myths are timeless, and because they're timeless, they're anachronistic.
Oh yeah, I mean, even just like the sources that we have, you know, I think something that people don't think of it so much if they don't, you know, live in this world, it is the amount of time that even the sources that we have spanned, right? Like you can't really talk anachronisms when the start to finish years of just the ancient sources are like at least 1,000 years worth of time, you know? Like, yeah, what is an anachronism when the stories of these gods and characters have spanned a full 1,000 years?
Absolutely. And people also forget that this wasn't a really central religion in the way that we now think of religions. So different cults, different variations, all kind of merged together. And that's why you do have, for so many characters, so many different variations of myths. Even if you don't go to something as far as the Orphics, you still have different birth genesis, different things, different places. And you just kind of need to love that, because if you can't love this confusion, then all you're really trying to do is what makes me the most angry, which is that you're trying to pick your favorite and force it upon others. It's okay to pick it, but you can't ignore the fact that someone else can pick something else. And if I can go on a slight tangent as a Greek person, I think that this probably is one of my greatest annoyances with a lot of the retellings, which I read and I love and I give my money to. Like, I don't want anyone to go and say I don't like Madeline Miller or anyone like that. I've enjoyed those books and I'm really glad they've been written. I'm really glad I read them. But at the same time, they've created an idea of Greece that is not quite Greece. I think what they've done, and it always slightly disjoints me from the stories because I'm so close to them and I know them so well, is that people forget that these places are real. Like, when you grow up, you learn these stories as part of the cosmos and the genesis of your own hometown or your home country. They are not this faraway thing that it might be for someone living in Canada who doesn't think of themselves as part of this place. So I always feel that they miss that, and because they miss that, they miss and ignore elements of Greek mythology and Greek history even that don't really fit the West. And I think that's partly something that created a very long time ago. And obviously contemporary Greece is very influenced by an Eastern culture because it has changed and it has evolved and it has continued. But even the ancient Greek myths are having elements that you can see are there in contemporary Greek society as pathogenesis of problems. And you just need to obviously either accept them and see ancient Greek mythology as not this lovely fictional world, or you need to accept that there's another side to it or another version of it. Because all really mythology is fan fiction upon fan fiction upon fan fiction, world by world, culture by culture, age by age. Somebody has given their slight take on what this set of characters do. And it's great. I love it. I love the feeling of comfort being able to read these characters again and again and again. But I do feel that people forget that they're real places and they have their names are there and people use those names and feel those names, and there's sides of Greek mythology that don't fit the West, and that's okay. You don't need to like them, but you can't ignore their presence either. I'm done.
Yeah. No, I think that's so important. I wanna hear and say so many things based on everything you just said. Like, obviously, I'm very much coming from this Canadian standpoint, but I do fortunately live in the sources in a way that obviously this is not to say that I understand the cultural aspects, but what you were saying earlier about what was the phrase you used? It really like spoke to me, just like loving the confusion, I guess, of all the different variations and sources and all the contradictions. And that is something that is my absolute favorite part of this job, is loving the contradictions. I want to bask in the 8 different versions of somebody's story, and I want to try to just piece apart why each one is the way it is, because I think that that is the most interesting part of mythology. So I'm just with you completely. From that cultural perspective, I would love to know, if you have examples that come to your mind of the ways that, your experience as a Greek person growing up in Thessaloniki, how you feel that the culture really, either differs from the retellings, if you want to be that specific, or if just like you want to talk about it from that cultural perspective and, kind of how you live in the sources in that really unique way.
So obviously, a lot of these myths and these dodecatheon stories are more from southern Greece. So in northern Greece, it was slightly different. But I think I'm trying to find something specific to say, because I don't want to go into something really generic. Is that we use ancient Greek concepts, names, stories in our everyday speeches, like nearly jokes, as expressions. And one of the things that it always comes to mind, and I had never thought of it as much until this person pointed it out to me, is that every language is an expression of thought, a unique expression of thought, and that's why you can never have fully synonyms between two different languages. And Greek is a really rich language, and all these gods and these words from the ancient past are expressions of thought that have stayed in Greece. So in our everyday speech and in our everyday life, they are there because you would just call a Mammoothian attempt to do something as an Heraclea attempt, because Heracles, that's how he would have fought. Or you would have expressions of how this person is like Zeus because of their bad behavior, especially now that we're moving into a more gender equality attempt and trying to look at sexual assault in a different way. And people also forget that these plays of ancient Greek are performed on a yearly basis in Greece, and a lot of times a lot of these plays are retellings themselves. I have not experienced retellings only through these very small forms. I have had the privilege, and I'm really lucky that I have been able to do that, that I can see the same play performed by different actors nearly every year, and many times performed in different settings, even if the story remains the same. And at the same time, when I walk down the street, even in a place like Thessaloniki, I am constantly having little clues here and there of this past, of the Gorgon of Thermaikos, and of how we were taught and discussed the ecological problems of the port of Thessaloniki with the Gorgon. The stories of, like, even Greek TV, where the Gorgon of Thessaloniki, actual Thessaloniki, the princess, like, who was a historical person, was there and was complaining about the pollution of the Aegean Sea. So it is kind of jokey. It's not always serious, but it's part of everyday life, even for people that don't necessarily know the details. And I think that's more the difference, that you might not know that this is why you call it or this is why you say it, but that's where it comes from. And all that really has happened to someone like me is that maybe I'm just a bit more aware of it. And again, I want to reiterate more than anything, please write the stories, please read the myths, tell me your most extraordinary takes on Greek mythology. Just don't tell me this is it. That's more my thing.
Yes. Oh no, you've basically just like summarized my podcast with that phrase, or like at least how it's been for the past couple of years. Like there's no finite anything. There is no canon. There is no right or wrong answer to a question about Greek mythology, I mean, except when there is, but they're rare. I think, yeah, I absolutely love that. And like, so I've, been trying to learn Greek, and from just like, say, I want to say it's more than a handful of words, because I definitely, I know I know a like decent number of words. I just can't form a lot of sentences yet. But the biggest thrill for me in learning Greek, just as this enormous nerd for Greek mythology who has read an absurd amount, is learning a word and then immediately understanding its mythological context, and then like getting this real visceral thrill of being like, oh my god, I understand, how this word came to be in modern Greek. Like, one of my favorite examples is, and I tell my friends this, and like they're not usually into Greek mythology, and they just kind of like, they're like, okay, Liv, like, sure. But I like, every time, I've been over there with somebody, I've been like, okay, so, I explain like, the niceties, kalimera, kalispera, kalinikta, like just, saying good morning, good day, good evening to people. And okay, so Kalispera, it has this connection to Hesperides because they are, the goddesses of like the evening and the west. And then of course, Kalinikta, oh, we've got that's Nyx. She's the goddess of night, like, and all these different kind of connections. And so just from that perspective, learning those connections via the language has been such a, just like a nerdy thrill for this like dweeby little Canadian. But I can completely see what you mean, just in that tiny way that I understand. And I love hearing more about, how it actually like impacts you, growing up there. I'm trying not to just like be like, oh my god, I just love Greek culture so much. But I do. I really do. So Canada has like no culture. We're just like a colonial mess. So I think I just like latched on. I was like,
That's
please give me something with culture. Oh, it is. It's just not a great one. Not that Greek mythology is all roses and daisies, but
I think, like in every kind of culture and every kind of history, you need to celebrate the joys and try to fix the tears.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm utterly fascinated hearing about, I mean, all of this in this way. I'm like, just give me more of literally everything. But I also want to make sure that we're talking enough about like your book. I want people to want to read it, not least because like I'm just so fucking thrilled that Demeter gets a book. Like, to give my listeners like a slight backstory to how, you and I are talking. But I saw somebody tweet about your book and I was like, oh my god, like Demeter gets her own story. Like, I lost my mind. I was just so excited that not only that this book, exists, but I wanted to hear all of your thoughts about her. So, I mean, you've talked about it a little bit, but do you want to talk more about like what you wanted to do with Demeter, like on a story level, like what you wanted to sort of emphasize about her, because she is this goddess who is sort of like deeply underrepresented in certainly, like you're saying, like English speaking Western, retellings and all of that.
Oh yes, I mean, thank you for letting me. I can tell you what I wanted to say, what I was too afraid to say. I think there were myths about Demeter that I definitely am like putting it as an entry myself, that I want to talk about. The myth I was too scared to add. But kind of beginning on the story is that, first of all, I'd like to say to everyone listening that please don't read, please read the book, please buy the book, but please don't expect the book to be the story of Demeter being this wonderful representation of a female heroine. My Demeter is not a hero. And I did not write her as a hero. I actually specifically followed, as much as the myths would allow, a corruption arc and created the story of how she became a villain. So you are not going to find in my Demeter a person that changes the world for the better. This is a character that
I love that.
has within her understanding of the world feelings about injustice, seeing injustice in other situations, but is still so ingrained in this power dynamic of patriarchy that she's expressing in herself. She only reacts and actually opposes it when these power dynamics directly influence her. She's not going to be your champion of women or your champion of the downtrodden. She cares about herself and about her life. And actually, the more she gets to fight for herself, the more she accepts that she is a person of power and should be treated the same as the men, rather than the men are not kind, if that makes sense. Like, she only kind of sees it as that there's this hierarchy of the world, and I'm gonna be on top. How much on top can I be? And she's maybe a little bit more sympathetic than other characters because she's also been a victim. So she's also kind of experienced how unfair it is. And she would maybe, if she lived in the world right as she wanted, not be like that as much. Like, and that's where Hestia comes a lot into play, how she would have really liked the Dodecathon to be led by Hestia, as they were inside the stomach. But then she sees this brother who has the different upbringing from them as this corrupting influence that took away whatever family they had created inside the stomach, and they became just forces that fought instead of joined together. So the book really discusses issues of family, and it isn't, if you condense it very much, it's a family drama. It is, at its core, how people fight for who is going to be the leader of the family now the father is dead, and two people fighting for the custody of a child. At its core is that. But obviously it is packaged with a lot more things, so it doesn't only read as that. But definitely parenthood and family dynamics are really important. Definitely female role in patriarchy is also really important, because patriarchy wouldn't exist without women of any size and form that are supporting the patriarchy because they don't want to lose the little bit of power they have through it. So you suddenly see a deity that can fight for the weaker, understands their plight, and doesn't care.
I love this. You're making me so happy.
And at the same time, you have this mother, and that's what was why when I found that myth, I was like, yes, somebody needs to write this. I'm gonna do it because nobody else seems interested to do it. That is willing to end the world for her child, is willing to go to these levels of destruction, and at the same time abandons two other children.
I'm trying not to just be so happy about this description.
No, so it's just basically a Demeter that is full of contradictions that, but it's also very much, I think if you try to read it trying to say, how is she going to be the hero that's going to save us? You're not going to find it. Could she have been? Mm-hmm. Maybe. If she had a different influence as she became an adult. But at this point and in this trajectory of mythology, she is a goddess that, and I like to say that, she's Demeter the Cito, the one who feeds, and yet she starved the world.
Okay. I love all of this. It just feels so Demeter, absolutely, the Demeter that I think of. But also I think that the way you're talking about this is such a great, it's just such a great example of, I mean, not an example, but all of these retellings that have been coming out, and, I agree with you, the more, the merrier. I'm so glad there are so many. I'm so glad that most of them feature women. I think that that's so important. And I love, all the different ways that we can see them, because they are, there are countless ways that you can, view the Greek mythology broadly. But at the same time, there is also this habit that publishers have, like I won't blame the authors, it's typically publishers, this habit to call everything that features a woman feminist. And I think that is detrimental to the idea of feminism, this idea of equality. Like, feminism is not, some ideal perfect world where nothing is wrong. Feminism is simply the notion that women can be equal and should be equal to men. And so to me it sounds like your book is almost that in its most sort of like purest form, where Demeter is not a heroine like you're saying, but she is equal to the men. And like, it's a great example of how a woman trying to be as equal to the men in that kind of context can be like just as corrupting. And I think that's so fascinating to look at it that way. And it just feels honest in a way that I think a lot of times, these are written to be happy stories, and that's fine. But personally, when I read Greek mythology, I see very few happy stories. And I like the idea that there is this darkness, and that there is like, that Zeus is such a corrupt and broken leader that if someone is trying to rival him, they almost have to become just as corrupt and broken as he is. And that, that's equality in its own very specific way.
And it's a very Greek, I want to say, I think, element that we always find something negative in everything. We're quite pessimistic, I think. Or we're too optimistic. We're too extremes. But I think that's exactly it. I consider this a feminist book, but not in the sense that it's feminist because it allows this female cruelty. And I think there needs to be space for female wrath, female rage, female cruelty. And I think that's why it's equality. Feminist. Because it does allow a space for that to be explored. It doesn't mean it's going to be liked. Like, there's loads of great stories in literature that you're not meant to like the character, but you still want to hear their story. So that's what I wanted to do. And as I said, there is one specific thing that I did not dare to include it because I thought that I can't. First of all, I don't think I can do it justice. But secondly, I don't know if an audience could take it. Obviously, within the story, Demeter is also raped. That has happened. There is a myth in Pausanias where this is how she has her second child and third child, the twins, Despina, whose name we don't know, like the mistress, and Arion, the horse. But once Persephone is like settled and that coming back every year, that side of the story is done. There's another myth which is about Iasion, who is, I think, if I remember correctly, a prince, and how in Corinth Demeter is so intrigued by his outside appearance that she enchants him to go and sleep with her. And I thought, well, this is basically a goddess raping a man. I thought, but I don't know if I don't think, that's why I didn't do it, and I didn't think I could do it justice. First of all, I don't think that I would be able to convince an audience that has already seen Demeter do really horrible things to also see her at the very end rape. And I thought, I'm not gonna include it, but if I ever dared to write a sequel to that book, which I have no plans to, that would be the story I would write. How she becomes this person that has this long-term relationship from all terms and accounts with this person, but has stolen their life. In a way that I think when male gods rape women, they tend to be married, they tend to have a life beyond it. But if you are the lover of a male prince, would you as a goddess allow them to also be married? It seems that in that idea of gender hierarchy, which is totally unfair, like, don't think that I agree with it, but it's okay for you as the god to take someone's wife but also let them have her. But as a female goddess, it seems that you couldn't possibly have a man that is also someone else's man. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? And then I thought that
It does.
really takes away even more from your life. And it's obviously inequality even between the gods, because there is one specific goddess that said that. I can't remember now the source or anything, but I think it's the goddess of the dawn, who had a lover.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah, she does that too.
and she had this human lover, and one of the myths, I think she says, male gods are really scared of female goddesses having human lovers. And
That's yeah.
yeah.
I want to find that source now. Sorry.
I'm gonna try to find it. I can't remember it. I'm really sorry. It just came to me right now. And about how, because they're so scared, when a female deity has a human male lover, it is a much bigger element of danger than when a male god has a human lover that is female or male. It doesn't matter, because in that sense of gender equality and gender power dynamics, there comes the god who is higher, but then the man who should be higher than women. That confusion between which side, which element is more important to create the proper family dynamic and hierarchy of relationship is so confusing that they just can't have it. A woman should only be married and should only be sleeping with a man that is of equal or higher standard. Going to someone below her and her having that power because of her class or her power in the case of gods is so disruptive, just as a concept. And obviously that's the case even if you look at history at a later point, because a man could marry a poorer woman and elevate her. A woman can't. And I actually, if you know of me anything, is that I'm also an art historian, and I actually have a specific artist's life where that's exactly what happened. Yeah, so this is what happens in my head. This is how I live.
No, I find that utterly fascinating, and it's really it's opened up a lot of thoughts from in my head about the way that this does work, because I think you're so right, but I also think there's another level happening, which is that so you're saying, women can be the lovers of gods and their husbands. There's no issue there, it's never going to be a problem. But I also think that it really speaks to the few instances we have of when male gods, try or succeed in having male human lovers, because even those cases, I think it's just it further emphasizes the gender, because we have a number of instances of that. Almost all of them result in the mortal dying during the attempt at becoming a lover of a god. Or the one example I can think of where the mortal doesn't die is Ganymede with Zeus, and his life is still irreparably changed. He doesn't get to return home or behave like a mortal or marry. He has to live as Zeus's cupbearer on Olympus. And so even in those cases where a male human mortal is involved, there still has this dynamic, like you're saying, where it is still totally different from the way women are treated. And I think that it's obviously tragic in the case of the men. Dying is equally shit, but it does say so much about the gender dynamics, because the women are just this sort of toy to be used by the gods, and then but the husbands still get to keep them because they're equally their husband's toy in this world. Whereas when the gods do want to take a male lover, that can't even happen. They can't become a toy because they're a man. So something else has to happen, and that usually is death. But it's still a very interesting look at the way that these gender dynamics do work. and you're right about the few women who take mortal, the few goddesses, I should say, who take mortal lovers, like Demeter and Iasion, and Eos, the dawn, and I'm gonna forget who it was, Tithonus, I think. Those cases are also tragic, but also like they're typically assault, but they also result in, I don't know the story of Iasion actually, like in terms of the end result, but like for Eos, you know, she abducts Tithonus and takes him as a lover, but then she like, I think it's this one. There's a few different stories that kind of resemble it, but I think this is the one where she like asks for him to be immortal so that she could live with him forever, but she like forgets, or Zeus tricks her or whatever, but he doesn't get agelessness, so he just like lives to be old forever and just like sort of falling apart in age, but like doesn't die. And so it also like, you know, the women can't even have what they want. You know, even obviously it's non-consensual, and that's, it's horrific, but it still has this dynamic of like a goddess can't get, you know, even a mortal lover in the way that a god can.
Yeah, no, I think, and it's incredibly interesting as well as to the fact that this happens, and it's tragic as well. And I think the reason why, going back to Demeter, is that she is also quite a unique example, I think, of an unwed goddess that never weds, never has, in any kind of myth I've read, a marriage. She's an unwed mother. She's a mother of many fathers, which is very much a male thing. I think she's a very masculine, maybe not masculine is not the right word. There is definitely a male element in her character that I don't think any other goddess has, because all the other goddesses that don't have husbands that I can think of are usually in the Dodecatheon, at least. Maybe the Titans are a little bit different, but in the Dodecatheon you have all of them are virgins, so their way to be unwed is to not have that pleasure in life. It's like the censorship of human female pleasure. But Demeter is like, I'll have that, I'll have this, and you can do anything about it. And it does again point to that oldness. Because I think there is some proverbial myths or sources that say that both Hades and Poseidon wanted to marry her. Like, and then one of them, in one myth, rapes her, the other takes her daughter. So there's a lot to unpick there. But I found that incredibly interesting, because even in contemporary standards in Greece, for example, I would say that an unwed mother would still receive some comments from certain people. Like, it would not be necessarily looked down on, but it would be something that would be discussed, especially in more rural places, especially in smaller communities, or by older relatives. And definitely, if you went back to even when my mom gave birth to me, which is 30 years ago, I think it would not be easy to be an unwed mother. The system and the community and the society. And yet you see that this goddess, that because of all these situations, has a more, I would say, a different kind of independence than other goddesses, is still not top dog, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes me think of what I love about Aphrodite, who, you know, is very much married, but she still lives in that very similar role, because while she's married to Hephaestus, she does not have children by him. She has children by other men. And I've always loved the strength that comes with her character, in that, like, you know, even when Zeus tried to make her less powerful by having her marry Hephaestus, she just still was like, nah, like, I am a very powerful goddess. I'm going to continue to do what I want. And what I want is Ares, you know, among others. And I love that about her. But it, you know, what you're saying about the ancientness of Demeter also applies to Aphrodite. And so I think that connection's really interesting because like Aphrodite is of course based in like these Eastern goddesses of like similar values. And it remains the same where these two goddesses, have this kind of under the surface power that the gods and, the patriarchal nature of the stories as they exist now has tried to like, break them down, turn them into something less powerful than they actually are. But you can kind of piece out these strands that still exist that show, the more ancient power that still kind of exists within them despite all the attempts at sort of taking them down.
Oh, definitely. And obviously, like with Demeter, Aphrodite's power is not so much when she does it as when she doesn't do it. Like with a lot of these male gods, their powers are that I will rise a wave, I will throw a thunderbolt. But with these goddesses, their power is when they stop, when they give up. That's the danger of those. And it's obviously something I slightly touched upon, I didn't really explore in the book, but that what they really wanted, I don't know what they wanted. In my book, they wanted, was to give these more abstract powers to the female goddesses, and then create nearly a bastardization of that element. Like the woman that, the goddess of matrimony is a cheated woman. As the protector of women, Hera punishes women more than anyone else and is so jealous and is so unfair to them. And there you see that there's powerlessness in the fact that if she's gone, actually nothing might happen. But with Hestia, with Aphrodite, with Demeter, their power comes actually in the threat of their absence. And obviously, I can't think of a myth where Aphrodite actually exercises that power, but that's what Demeter does. Demeter refuses her power to the world, and it's catastrophic. And it obviously shows that as an allegory of feminine role within society and within the world, that sometimes they might be doing, women in the world generally might be doing things that we take for granted, but actually without them there's a really important lack. And that's not actually only for women, it's like for a lot of jobs that people and a lot of roles that people play within society, we don't think about them, we don't consider them as something like worth noting. But the moment they're gone, there's a huge societal collapse. And in Thessaloniki that actually happened, I always like to refer to it, is when the bean collectors went on strike for 6 months.
Wow, 6 months.
Yeah, I think it was that long. I was a child when it happened, but I remember as a memory the impact of that. And that's why I always think these are really vital supportive roles that they are nearly, if they're done well, they are negligent. But when they're not done, they're gaping holes.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my God, I love this conversation so much. But Aphrodite, so there is, like in the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite, there is mention of like the threat of her. That's the one where she, Zeus kind of gets her to want to have sex with Anchises. And because he's like mad that her power over love and sex always has the gods going after mortal women, but like she's never gone after a mortal, and he gets kind of like worked up about it. But equally, like the reason why he has her marry Hephaestus is that he recognizes that her power is such that she has to be tamped down in some way, because if she has this free reign, like she can make them do anything through love and lust. And so I think that while we don't have the same example of a story where Demeter fully withholds it, like a lot of our stories around Aphrodite contain the threat of either withholding it or putting it on in a way that the gods don't want. And so I think, like that's such an interesting way of seeing it. This type of power that they have that is like totally hidden until it's not, and then you're in real trouble.
And obviously, like with Demeter, if Aphrodite completely withheld her power, the threat is extinction. It's not solvable.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, both of them hold like the absolute like epitome of control over the world in that way.
Yeah, so it's there's some really cool goddesses out there for people to consider.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that it's a shame for me that a Western narrative has not told you of that, has not
Yeah.
kind of, like, I think especially for Demeter, going back to that, although Aphrodite is obviously such a great example. Now can I write an Aphrodite novel as well? I love this conversation.
So I'm working on that too, so don't worry.
Okay, excellent. I'm looking forward to that. But what was I saying? I forgot. But yes, with Demeter, because the myth of Hades and Persephone is so popular the last few years, it is such a shame that that myth, which had drastic, horrible consequences for the world above, is never really discussed. Like, it's a traumatic thing that happened to the world. It's kind of like, if you look at this now, it's ecological disaster, and how, like, and which I think is also not coincidence, because I don't know if you're aware of the Greek Dark Ages, where there seems to have been this kind of like abrupt stop of civilization, and it kind of needed to restart. It does, for me, feel like a memory of when something so bad happened that kind of everything needed to stop and then start again.
Yeah. I wonder if that's something where, like, because I know the Dark Ages have been sort of reevaluated and like typically called like the early Iron Ages now, because they have some remnants of things, but yes, like very little written word. You know, there was like kind of like real big blip in ancient Greek history. And I kind of wonder, you know, specifically when it comes to the story of Demeter being this kind of like restart, like all it makes me think of is the eruption of Thera, and how, like, you know, if you are talking about this sort of like remembered history very far in the past where you don't have an exact memory of it, but like, you know, what else looks like a horrific famine, but specifically tied to the fertility of the earth, than a volcanic eruption so big that it would have changed the face of the Mediterranean, right? Like, you know, if anything's going to cause a complete disrupt in growing plants and food, it's going to be like that level of eruption. And so, yeah, like it feels like this like sort of cultural memory of that time, like then put into her story. And I know I'm also just tying that because I fucking love volcano stories, but still, like, it, you know, it feels like reminiscent.
No, absolutely. And I think, again, because Demeter is such an old goddess, there's something really old. It kind of all ties together. So basically, and a synopsis, I wrote this story because as a little girl I thought Demeter should have been one of the most important Greek gods, and the world didn't obey my liking, so I decided to write her story to make her a bigger badass, and I thought the world gave her justice for it.
I love that so much. That's the perfect reason to tell her story. That's just so wonderful.
I don't know. I just thought it was one of those things that it was the story I always think I wanted to write. It's very different from other things I write, because I don't write mythology actually a lot. I write more second world fantasies, a lot of reimaginings and stuff like that. But this is potentially my only, but we'll see, actual myth retelling.
I mean, Demeter deserves it, though. Like, she really does. So I'm so glad that you've given her, you know, this book. even if it's your only retelling.
Well, you never know. I mean, there's always elements of myths. It's just I've never tried to tell someone's story. I've kind of always just thought, I'll take here this, here that. We'll just use a bit of that, a bit of this. We'll just do whatever we want. But this time I thought, no, I need to look at this as a more concrete thing and try not to deviate. Because if I wanted to deviate, then it would really be fan fiction.
Yeah.
And really,
I mean, there's so many levels of fan fiction in Greek mythology and then retellings.
Yeah. No, but it would have been like quite a different thing. But I did add elements of it. Like, I did add certain scenes that were more for my personal interest, as in that, yes, this happened. Somebody needed to pay. And obviously Demeter does have those myths, because he has the now I can never pronounce that, even in Greek. It's very hard. Erichthison.
Oh, Erysichthon, yes. Yeah, the one who eats himself.
Yes, and I thought, there you go, somebody paying.
Yes. Oh, that's my favorite, or one of my favorite stories.
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
so I thought, I did allow moments like this. Obviously, that myth wasn't especially, but there were other myths as well that kind of gave that slight feeling. But I also added a couple of bits here and there where it was more me being like, yes, that's what should happen. But obviously mythology doesn't allow me to go full crazy, so I just added little hints here and there. But I don't generally write good characters. My characters are all terrible people doing terrible things. My Demeter was kind of trying to be even more worse, I think, than the myths allowed. I think I might have overdone it in some parts, but I just loved the rage. And I wanted to really reiterate that the biggest characteristic of this goddess is that she's really angry, as her wrath. Not just anger, it's like uncontrollable rage.
Yes. I'm so happy with all of this. I really I'm so glad that this retelling exists. I just think it's exactly what was like missing. I'm pumped.
Oh, I'm
sorry,
that's
like that's all I have to say.
I really hope you like it. Let me know what you think.
I will. Oh no, it sounds wonderful. And I mean, I'm so excited. Do you want to tell my listeners like a bit more about where to find it, when it's available? Well, I guess by the time this episode comes out, it'll be available. But is there more, about the physical book you want to share, and anywhere you want my listeners to follow you or read more or anything?
Yes. So, first of all, thank you for thinking of buying my book. And if you actually do buy it, thank you very much for buying it. I'm really, 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 really grateful to every single bit of support I get. I think it's really important to support indie presses, because they actually do really great work. And it's sometimes the only places that will publish stories that are not quite mainstream, because as Liv said, the current publishing trends wouldn't really allow, I think, for such a negative portrayal of female myth retelling. But if you are interested in buying my book, you can find it on Amazon. You can find it on my publisher's website, which is Ghost Orchard Press. You can also find it in quite a few bookstores, such as Waterstones in the UK or Barnes and Nobles in the US, I think it is. But really, I would ask, if you can, to buy it from the bookshops if you can, because that way it hopefully will inspire more bookshops to stock the book. And if anyone is interested in having questions or thoughts, or wants a signed copy, I'm more than happy to be contacted on Instagram, or through my website, or through Twitter, or through Blue Sky, or Threads. There's so many social medias. I'm pretty much everywhere. So feel free to get in touch. I am not that scary. I'm just loud, and I just will talk on my own. But This is how I was raised. I am very sorry for being such a blabbermouth. I suffer from words diarrhea, but I'm really nice.
You are! No, this has been one of the, like, I'm so excited for this whole conversation. None of that was too much talking. Oh my god.
This was me on my good behavior.
Oh, no, it's wonderful. I will link to whatever I can in the episode's description so my listeners can find everything. But yeah, I'm really so thrilled. This conversation was so much fun. All the different levels, like between hearing, about retellings from your perspective as a Greek person is so important to me. But also Demeter getting a female rage story, like I just think is so what retellings needed, that I'm really thrilled to have spoken with you and to have that your book is going to exist in the world. So thank you so much for talking to me.
Oh, I just want to finish by saying thank you so much for having me. It was such a great opportunity to talk about Demeter with someone that really seems to get Demeter the way I do. So I am so thrilled I got this chance. And thank you so much for your support.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I'm so thrilled. Nerds, thank you so much for listening. You can find links to Winter Harvest and following along with Ioanna for more in the episode's description. But if you're able, check out this book. I think it's basically available everywhere. You just have to work a little harder for it because it is an indie publisher. But honestly, that's the best because we need those. So please support this book, this author, the publisher themselves. I wish I had more to say at this end, but like I said, the conversation was recorded at a much different time and I'm just crumbling right now. So I hope you enjoyed it. I really did have so much fun, and listening back, it was absolutely wonderful. I'm just reminded so much of everything we talked about and how much I learned, and now I'm being reminded of, thankfully. Editing episodes is the best. But I also just want to say, like, it was so interesting. I was editing this conversation. We recorded it months and months ago, but I was editing it, right before it was going to drop. And at the same time, I had been recording 2 other conversations for this month's worth of episodes, and everything was just fitting together in this really, really interesting way. I cannot wait for March's conversations, at the least. Have not written any scripts for regular episodes yet, but the conversations are all recorded now, and they are good. We are talking about angry women. We are talking about the things men did to make us forget all of the great women of Greek mythology. We are talking about boob cups. I'll leave that one for you. The many-boobed Artemis that maybe they weren't boobed. You can just wait and see. When it comes to that, I have some truly incredible episodes coming up, including the one I did admit was the, either I said sexiest or smuttiest, either one is relevant, episodes that I've ever done on the show, so stay tuned. Today's is just capping things off with an angry, righteous, and vengeful Demeter. Something I think we all maybe need a little bit right now. I know I do. So thank you all for listening. Let's Talk About Myths, Baby is written and produced by me, Liv Albert. Michaela Smith is the Hermes to my Olympians, my assistant producer. Laura Smith is the production assistant and audio engineer. The podcast is part of the iHeart Podcast Network. Listen on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Help me continue bringing you the world of Greek mythology and the ancient Mediterranean by becoming a patron, where you will get bonus episodes and more. Visit patreon.com/mythsbaby or click the link in this episode's description. Thank you all so much. Stay tuned for more women, more wild stories. Women's sexuality, I think we are covering in this month's episodes in a very new way, and I'm really looking forward to it. There is so much more to come. Stay tuned. Happy March, everyone. Thank you all. I am Liv, and I love this shit.